Well, I too would like to thank the organizers as well as David and the ATS for sponsoring this. The Bishop's Tale would be a tough thing to discuss. As David called me and he said, I'd like you to give the history of the Bishop's Mitre. And I said, well, it'll be a bit prosaic, and please don't turn me off after 1 minute after the end of the thing. So I hope you enjoy what I have to say. Well, a conclave. What is a conclave? A conclave is from cum clave, with a key. So today we talk about the Bishop's Tale. Our Bishop's Tale tells of the mitre and the mitral, both ancient, sacred, and oft misunderstood. Alas, the Bishop's Mitre propels us heavenward, whilst the mitral keeps us earthbound. So ne'er forget that ancient mitre and the mitral, for they are both overseers of our conclave of pilgrims that are here today. Now, these are a different group of pilgrims going to Canterbury, but they serve. To wit, this conclave of pilgrims is on a journey to learn about the mitral and not the mitre. For this we have gathered today. The mitre goes back many, many centuries, and in fact probably had its origins in Israel with this hat that was worn by the high priest. In Greek, it means headband or turban. The Western Church is actual form that's a sort of a folding cap consisting of two halves which, when are not worn, it lies flat upon each other. These sides are stiffened, and when the mitre is worn, they rise in front and behind like two horns, two leaflets pointed from the tips, or the cornua mitrale. By about 1150, there was the Catholic custom of wearing, of wearing the bishop's mitre. It was general among bishops. Episcopalis is the overseer or the bishop, and here are some of the ancient mitres. This is the largest number of mitral valves or mitres that I've ever seen. This is in St. Peter's. We photographed this several years ago, and there are 18 mitres in this photograph. And as you can see, it does look a bit like the bishop's mitre, with the anterior leaflet seemingly like the anterior and the posterior leaflets of the valve. Andreas Vesalius first described the bishop's mitre and the mitral valve, and this is from the Vesalian amphitheater at Elbo in Padua. This is where he first described it in his book called the Humani Corpus Fabrica from Basel in 1543. And what he described the mitral is membrana. And as you can see in this photograph, it does appear like there were membranes. And he considered them inlet and outlet. The membranes, or the leaflets, extend from the broad base of the blunt apex, featuring farther into the cavity of the left ventricle than the membranes at the orifice of the hollow vein. And the hollow vein was the tricuspid valve, due and to the right. One of the processes faces to the right side of the left ventricle and the other to the left side, which means that the opening are at the front and rear. Fibers, or the cordia tendini, grow out from them in a row, and these stretch downwards and eventually to the substance of the heart, all over the area at the apex of the left ventricle. They're augmented and stabilized by fleshy substance of the heart. Since the membranous circle of the vein-like arteries divides into two processes, the experts in dissection state that only two membranes control this orifice. One might not be inappropriately likened to the bishop's mitre, in that the part that goes around the head corresponds to the membranous circle and the anterior and posterior apices of the mitre to the process. The membranes of the leaflets extend from the broad base to the blunt apex, reaching farther into the cavity of the left ventricle than the membranes at the orifice of the hollow vein of the tricuspid valve. One of the processes faces right side of the left ventricle and the other the left side, which means the openings are at the front and rear. Fibers of the cordia tendini grow out from them in a row, and these stretch downwards and eventually to the substance of the heart, all over the area at the apex of the left ventricle. They're augmented and stabilized by the fleshy substance of the heart. Since the membranous circle of the vein-like arteries divides into two processes, the experts in dissections state that only two membranes control the orifice. One akins it to the bishop's mitre. And thanks to Frank Wells, I got these illustrations from the Queen's collection at Windsor. And as you can see, Leonardo drew cordal structure with the fan cords at the anterior and posterior commissures, strut cords, as well as edge cords, basal cords. And he also described leaflet coaptation later on. This was after Vesalius, of course. He even drew what we call the water gate, or the mitre gate. And if you see this, it can be akin to the mitral valve, with coaptation below the annulus. Sir Henry Soutar first attempted to repair the mitral valve with a digital commissurotomy. This was proposed earlier by T. Lauder Brunton, one of his English colleagues who never did this, was a physician. The first mitral valve prosthetic device to be inserted was done by Nina Braunwald and Andrew Morrow at the National Institutes of Health on March 10th, 1960, and you can see this. So this was a bit like a bishop's mitre. The first successful long-term mitral implant was done by Albert Starr, and you can see this Starr, later Starr-Edwards valve, appears like the bishop's mitre, pointing heavenward. There were many types of valves, all bileaflet, some monoleaflet, and this is what we have today. There have been many attempts at mitral valve repair, as you can see, from many different people in the United States, going back to Europe and then coming back to the United States with Alain Carpentier's 1983 discussion, the French correction at the honored lecture at the AATS that year. And Alain Carpentier taught us much. He taught us how to repair the mitral valve and the basic function of the mitral valve as it relates to repair. You can see he's cogitating here, he's thinking, he's giving us techniques. We've modified many of these techniques. We've modernized many of these techniques. And so today we're here to solve the problem of what is next in mitral valve repair. So, Professor, how will this Bishop's Tale end? Well, it will not end at our conclave. We may discover new and wonderful ways to repair our bishop's mitre, the mitral valve. And as you can see today with new imaging techniques, we have ways of imaging valves, and this is from a real MRI, this is from Biodigital here in New York, where we're basically looking throughout the mechanism of the mitral valve and finding new ways to repair valves that are physiologic. So I hope you enjoy the conclave and the Bishop's Tale.